Hey y'all, good morning. I've been trying to figure out something witty or clever to say about this, and I got nothing at the moment. I will say, this is awesome. Thank you for everybody who's brought soup and all kinds of different things. I will say, the Taylor Swift Target demo, more likely to come to the 11 a.m. service than the 9:30 service, so we'll see what happens here later on, but I am just very grateful. Every one of these cans is going to touch the lives of someone in our community. Our food pantry serves around 275 households every month, around 1,000 people every month. And so thank you for just this outpouring of chunky soup. We are grateful for the ways in which God moves in us. I love a good, like the best church shenanigans we can do are the ones where even if it's not your particular brand of shenanigan, people are still welcome to participate in it, which might speak to why I just want both teams to have fun as like dominating this thing at the moment. I may have told this story last year at the Super Bowl that when I was at a church in Athens, Tennessee from 2012 to 2018 as the associate pastor, we didn't have a food pantry, but we did fun stuff like this at the Super Bowl. And it was always very easy because Tom Brady was in most of those Super Bowls. And if you, like me, are an East Tennessee Peyton Manning, the GOAT, person, it was very easy to just be against Brady on all of these things. So they were all very one-sided. And that church was a mile from Tennessee Wesleyan University, and I smarted off about something with Brady one year. And there was a Tennessee Wesleyan student from, Connecticut who, it was her first time at our church, and she came up at the end, and she was like, listen, I really like this church, but if you hate Tom Brady, you need to tell me why that is, because I don't think I can go to church here if you hate Tom Brady. And I was like, well, I'm not sure you can go to church here. But no, we'll keep doing this every year and see what kind of fun we can have with it as we go. Our church, if you're new with us, our church is walking through the Gospel of Luke. We started January 1st. We transitioned this week to about the halfway point. This week we move from the season of Epiphany into the season of Lent. That happens on Wednesday at Ash Wednesday. As you heard in our opening video, we have an Ash Wednesday service right here in this room this year. We're grateful for the traditional sanctuary. If you were here with us on Christmas Eve, we have discovered the maximum number of human beings we can put in that room. So we are going to move our Ash Wednesday service into this space this year. That'll be Wednesday at 6:30. We would love for you to come. There's also an Ash Wednesday service for your kids over in the bubble ages 3 and up. We also, if you can't make the service, or if some people really value being able to wear the ashes all day. And so Kelly will be out here in the covered entrance from 7 to 9 a.m. on Ash Wednesday. I'll be out there during the lunch hour from 12 to 1. If you want to come by during those times and get some ashes, we would love for you to be part of that as well. So we transition to kind of a midway point in the Gospel of Luke this week. And what's happening in this section is this escalating series of miracles. One after the other, after the other, after the other. In Luke 8, in a span of 37 verses, Jesus calms a storm, casts a demon out of a man and sends it into a herd of pigs. A woman just touches his cloak and is healed of something she'd suffered with for 12 years. Then Jesus raises a young girl from the dead. All of that in 37 verses. So these big, powerful, obvious, memorable stories of what the power of God is doing through Jesus Christ, all on display in Luke chapter 8. And then at the start of Luke 9, he'll send his disciples out to do the same. This is Luke 9 in verse 1 and 2. So on the heel of all of those big miracles, Jesus in chapter 9 called the 12 together and gave the disciples power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. Now, for us, we don't tend to think of these terms necessarily for us as followers of Jesus Christ all the time today. We or at least I don't, and I'm willing to bet that most of us don't, think that when we go out of this place or when we go into our weeks on Monday, we don't often think of it as, I'm going out with authority over demons, I'm going out to heal the sick and cure diseases, and all of these kinds of things. Sometimes in church world, it becomes this thing that when Jesus was here, he operated in one way, and those early Christians, those early disciples, maybe they operated in that way too. But maybe for us, things are just a little different. When it comes to the miraculous, the big, powerful, forward, obvious kinds of things, we don't always think in those terms. I looked this week at what percentage of Americans believe in miracles and found 3 different studies. We've got a slide with this on the screen. What percentage of Americans believe in the miraculous? In 1999, about 80% of Americans believed in miracles. In 2010, almost exactly the same. But in 2023, that number had dropped from roughly 4 in 5 Americans to 2 in 3 Americans in 2023. Now, let me say a couple things about this. These are not the same. 3 different groups did these studies, so there is obviously some margin for error. The one from 99 is from CBS News. The one from 2010 is from Pew Research and NPR. The one from 2023 is from Barna Research and was referenced by Lee Strobel, who wrote The Case for Christ, if you're familiar with that book. So there's a little margin of error, but there's enough here to say that there's a decline in the percentage, at least of Americans, who believe in the miraculous, at least these days. Now, in part, what's interesting about this to me is in the study in 1999 and the study in 2023, they asked people who were responding, have you ever seen one? Have you ever seen a miracle? And the number of people who said they had seen a miracle was almost exactly the same in the study from 99 and the study in 2023, and it wasn't a huge percentage. In the study in 1999, 37% of Americans said they had seen a miracle. In the study in 2023, 38% of Americans said they had seen a miracle. So understand, it's not that we can say there are fewer people believing in miracles today because there are just fewer people who said they've seen one. The number of people who said they've seen a miracle, they've been part of a miracle, is about the same over the course of 24 years. And in both cases, it's less than 50%. So at least the people responding to this study, if this is representative of us and all those kinds of things, the majority of Americans believe in the miraculous, even though they haven't seen one. And what's causing fewer people to believe in the miraculous is not fewer people having seen one, if that makes sense. I think overall, in the study in 2023, when they asked the people who said, no, I don't believe in miracles, and they said, okay, why not? About half of them said they just didn't believe in the supernatural at all. The atheism, super rationalized, that sort of thing. So we kind of work with this general understanding of most people believe in the miraculous, though fewer than before, but more people than not say that they've never seen one, never been part of one, that sort of thing. Maybe there's this belief that this is just not, Jesus did his own thing back in the day, but this is just not how God works anymore. Jesus, in fact, does his own thing, does all these big miracles, then sends them out 2 by 2, and when they go in Luke 9, to some degree, it works. Here's verse 6 of Luke 9. So the disciples departed. They went through the villages, they brought the good news, and they cured diseases everywhere. So to some degree, even when Jesus is not physically present with them, these disciples are able to go out and do these things on some level for themselves. And I just don't know anything about that. I can't manufacture the miraculous, or at least I haven't been able to yet. And I'm willing to bet that most of us kind of feel the same way. I can't mass produce miracles. Or maybe I'm just thinking of it the wrong way or calling it the wrong thing. But for us, for followers of Jesus today, we tend not to look at it this way, and we don't have a lot of experience or a lot of vocabulary in saying we're going out and manufacturing these miracles. For me, I'm still inclined to believe in them. And the question for me, I think the question for us would be, if we don't feel like we can just go out and do, or that that's how we would put that language for us today, what is our part to play? What's our part to play in the miraculous? What's our part to play if we feel like we could use a miracle? Certainly, if you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you needed a miracle, what do? You pray, right? I think that's a great place to start. I'm also willing to believe that if you are or have been in need of a miracle and you're sitting in a room like this, I'm willing to believe that you have prayed. And I'm willing to believe that you would pray again if such a thing arose. And so when we ask ourselves, what part do we have to play in the miraculous? We should pray. Sure, absolutely. But is there anything else we can do? How else might we enter into the miraculous? And all of that leads us to our central story this morning, which in fact is one of the largest miracles that Jesus will ever do. In the middle of Luke 9, we find the story of the feeding of the 5,000. The feeding of the 5,000 stands apart from any other story in the Gospels because other than the events of Holy Week, other than the things that happen from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday, the feeding of the 5,000 is the only story that shows up in all four Gospels. It's in Matthew, it's in Mark, it's here in Luke, and it's in John. No other story until we get to Palm Sunday and those events, no other story shows up in all four Gospels, not even Bethlehem. And so just on that, this story carries particular weight for us, in addition to the power of the miracle itself. Let me say this morning that my favorite interpretation from this, the inspiration of what I want to share, comes from a former colleague of mine. When I was in the ordination process, when I was getting ready to be ordained, Tiana's doing all this now. You got to go to all these retreats and all this stuff, and you go to these retreats and they make you preach in front of the other candidates. It's a really nerve-wracking kind of thing, but you know, we're all trying to throw our fastball and trying to impress people and all that other stuff that I'm sure Jesus would fully approve of and all that stuff. And I went to one of these retreats and thought I had a good fastball. And then she's not in our conference anymore, but Nancy Martin, who was in the ordination process with me, got up and did a version of this. And I was like, dadgum. That's 101 on the gun right there, baby. Like, that's pretty good. So let me say, the inspiration from this comes from Nancy Martin at an ordination retreat. This is one of the best things I have ever heard about this passage. Here's the story. I'm going to read it to you in full in Luke 9, and then let's come back and talk about it. On their return. So again, remember, he sent them out. He did all the big miracles. He sent them out. They did some stuff. Now they've come back. On their return, the apostles told Jesus all they had done. And Jesus took them with him and withdrew privately to a city called Bethsaida. When the crowds found out about it, they followed him. And Jesus was super annoyed. No, Jesus welcomed them. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed to be cured. The day was drawing to a close, and the 12 came to Jesus and said, "Send this crowd away. They can go into the surrounding villages and the countryside to lodge and get provisions. We're here in a deserted place." But Jesus said to them, "You give them something to eat." They said, "Hey, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we're to go and buy food for all these people." There were about 5,000 men. Again, remember, 5,000 is just the men, not the women and the children too. Jesus said to his disciples, "Make them sit down in groups of about 50 each." They did so and made them all sit down. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, Jesus looked up to heaven, blessed and broke them, and gave them to the disciples. These are the communion verbs. He gives thanks, blessed, broke, gave them to his disciples, and set them before the crowd. All ate, all were filled, and what was left over was gathered up, 12 baskets of broken pieces. If you've been in church, I'm sure you've heard this story before. And again, it's in all 4 Gospels, so we get little details in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John to put it all together. If you're looking for the little boy in this story, that's in the Gospel of John, the little boy who is the one where they say he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what is that among so many? All these people, all this power, all of this weight here in this moment. It's an incredible miracle and an obvious one that people would have. This isn't one of these don't tell anybody about this miracles, because how would you, right? How would you not with that many people? For all of its power and for all of its scope and for all of its might and majesty, the least believable thing about this story is that there was only one person who thought to bring food. 5,000 men, including women and children. Nobody's mama was there. Listen, I don't go to Oak Ridge without thinking, do I need a snack along the way? The notion that only 5 and 2 is all that's in this whole gathering of people is the least believable thing about this story. So let's say you're there, and it's getting late, and Jesus is so compelling, and you want to stay, and he's teaching and healing, and all of these incredible things are happening. And the disciples, who've not only seen it, but done it themselves, are here in these moments. And they say, look, we need to send these folks away, all this other stuff. And Jesus says, well, why don't you give them something to eat? And maybe if you combine all these stories together, all the versions, and get the details of they're going around seeing who's got food. How many households were there that brought something? How many peanut butter and jellies were in the little Ziploc bags? But the people looked around at the other people, the thousands of people, and then they looked around at their family, and they quickly thought to themselves, we brought enough for us. And I'm sorry if you weren't being a good mom or a good dad, but if you didn't bring enough for your kids, that's on you. We brought how many people, when the baskets came around and they said, do you have anything to eat? How many people said, I don't? Or they don't have to lie about it. How many people just said, hey, look, I'm sorry, we brought enough for us? How many people, even face to face with Jesus, even compelled by him, even the disciples who had done these things, in the moment, didn't share, didn't trust, didn't give what they had, trusting that God could take it and make it something more. That Jesus could take it and make it something more. And the truth about this story is, Jesus doesn't do all this and say, you know what? You brought bread, you brought snacks, you brought oranges, I'm Jesus, I know everything. You're busted. You've got food and you didn't share it. You don't get to eat. It's not what he does. Everybody gets to eat. Their bellies, all of them, go home full. Every one of them. Every one of them ate. Every one of them ate until they're full. But how many of them, the miracle happened. How many of them missed the chance to be part of it? How many of them missed because they held on tight to what they had and didn't trust, didn't believe that God could take what little they had and make it into something more? And Jesus still does something good. Their bellies are still full, but how many of them miss the chance to be part of something more? Same dynamic shows up in one other story in the Bible, a much, much older story that if you've been to Vacation Bible School, I bet you know, have heard, or maybe remember. In the Old Testament, a man named Joshua leads the people in the Promised Land to a city called Jericho. Jericho is surrounded by what? A wall, a big old wall, and they can't get in. And God says, we're taking the city, but the people can't get in. So what do? They don't concoct. God gives them this whole plan to say, we're going to start walking around this city. We're going to walk around it once a day for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, we're going to walk around it 7 times. And at the end of that, trumpets are going to blow, and you're going to shout, and the walls are going to come down. And there's a small detail in that story. This is in Joshua 6 and verse 10. This is before they walk on the first day. There's this small detail that sometimes we overlook in this story. To the people, Joshua gave this command: "You shall not shout, you shall not let your voice be heard, nor shall you utter a word until the day I tell you to shout, and then you will shout." So the idea is total silence for a week. And the first time they speak is when they shout on the seventh day. You know the story, you know what's going to happen at the end, all of that stuff. But again, all this power and all this might. The least believable part of this story is that all these people kept their mouth shut for a week. How many, when they're walking around the Ark of the Covenant and all that good stuff, ram's horns and everything, once a day for a week, how many of them went back to their tents at night and looked at each other and said, "This is crazy, right? Like, we look like fools? Those guys up on the wall, like the guys in Monty Python, looking down on us and being like, look at these idiots walking around here." How many of them, as one day led to 2, led to 3, 4, 5, 6, how many of them looked at each other and said, "Tomorrow, are you going to shout? You going to do it? Are you? Are you?" When the moment of truth came, when the horns blew on the 7th day after walking around it 7 times, when the moment of truth came and Joshua cries out, "Shout, the Lord has given you the city," how many of them, the first thing they did is looked at their neighbor, right? If I ask you, it's human nature. If I ask you right now to raise your hand if you're a person, do you know what you're going to do? Are you raising your hand? Is somebody else raising their hand first? Right? How many of them looked at their neighbor? How many of them, when the moment came to shout, went, gave like the 30% shout? And man, what happens? Verse 20, the people shouted, the trumpets were blown, and as soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpets, they raised a great shout. The wall fell down flat. The people charged straight ahead into the city and captured it. God does the thing, because ultimately it's God who does the things, you know. But the call was to shout, not because the walls came down, but before. The miracle happened either way. But how many of them, how many of us, how many of me miss the chance to be part of it? It's much easier to shout after the walls come down, right? Of course, that's almost, again, also a natural reflex to shout because the walls came down. But what God invites us to do is to be in the business of shouting even before they come down. And that is super hard because I can't manufacture miracles. And if you're a person in this room, you don't have to raise your hand this time, but if you're a person in this room, I'm willing to bet that you've had some times when you wish some walls would come down and they didn't. The shout is not to like produce enough force to make the wall come down in this sense. I think that and the story of the feeding 5,000 is much more about, can we still trust? Can we still believe? Can we be people who don't miss any opportunity to participate, to celebrate that God is still good? I can't manufacture miracles, but I trust God to take what I have and to make it something more? Can I trust that I don't have to live my life holding on so very tightly to everything I have or putting it behind my back and just saying, well, I've got enough for us and I scraped together for this and I can't can we trust that God can take what we have and make it something more? And can we be people who are at least a little better at shouting, not after the walls come down, but before? Because we trust not even that it will manufacture or produce the miraculous, that we trust that God is somehow still good still with us, still on the throne, still God. The miracles happen either way in these stories. God is God and I am not, and I don't know how to manufacture the miraculous, but I can listen and try to trust and obey what it is that God calls us to do. One of the worst things you can do as a human being is miss an opportunity to celebrate, miss an opportunity to participate in something so much bigger. How many of them went home, their bellies were full, but they missed the chance to be part of it? Can we trust God to take what we have and make it something more? And can we shout, not after the walls come down or because they did, but because God is with us?